Dear students, welcome you all. Today we are going to discuss about Vedic polity, the chief source of information on the early history of the Aryans or Vedic people in India is the Vedas, perhaps the oldest literary remains of the Indo-European language. There are four Vedas: Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samveda, and Atharvaveda. Vedic literature has been traditionally held sacred, for it is believed to have divine source. The Vedic texts may be divided into two broad chronological strata: the early Vedic 1500 to 1000 BC, when most of the hymns of the Rig Veda were composed; the later Vedic, that's from 1000 to 600 BC, to which belong the remaining Vedas and their branches. The two periods correspond to two phases of Aryan expansion in India. The geographical horizons of the Rig Vedic hymns give us an idea of ancient Aryan settlement in the subcontinent. The early Aryan settlers were engaged in taking possession of the land of the seven rivers, Sapta Sindhva, represented by the Indus and its principal tributaries. The polity during the Vedic period can be understood under the following headings. The early Vedic period. It was believed in the early part of the 20th century that the polity represented in the Rig Veda was the full-fledged state system with all the constituent elements of a state. However, since 1950, the research have shown that in the earlier Vedic period, the polity was nothing more than a tribal chiefship, in which the term Rajana was used for the tribal chief, who was primarily a military chieftain leading the tribe in wars for the sake of taking possession of cows and other cattle wealth, but not taking over possession of territories. The administrative machinery of the Aryans in the Rigvedic period worked with the tribal chief in the center. He was called Rajana. Although his post was hereditary, we have also some traces of election by the tribal assembly called the Samiti. The king was called the protector of his tribe. He protected its cattle, fought its wars, and offered prayers to gods on its behalf. Several tribal assemblies such as Sabha, Samiti, Vidhata, and Gana mentioned in the Rig Veda exercised deliberative military and religious functions. Even women attended the Sabha and Vidhata in the Rigvedic times, but from the political point of view, important were the Sabha and Samiti. In the day-to-day administration, the king was assisted by a few functionaries. The most important functionary seems to have been the Prohita. The two priests who played a major part in the time of Rigveda were Vishartha and Vishamitra. The next important functionary seems to be the Sinani, prince received from the people voluntary offering called Bali. There were causes of theft, and especially we hear of the theft of cows. Spies were employed to keep an eye on such unsocial activities. The officials who enjoyed authority over the pasture ground was called Vrajapati. He led to the heads of the families called Kulapas, or the heads of the fighting hordes called Gramanis to battle. The king did not maintain any regular or standing army, but in times of war, he mastered a militia whose military functions were performed by different tribal groups called Varta, Gana, Grama, Sarda. The concept of territory was completely absent. The tribal chief or the Rajana was the leader of the people belonging to a particular tribe and not the ruler of any territory. This is why he was known as Jansaya Gopa or Gapti Jansaya. The term for territory are not common in the Rig Veda, although the term Jana, which means tribe, is used 275 times. The term Janapada does not occur even once. The term Rajya is used in one instance and the word Rashtra occurs 10 times. This suggests that the territorial aspect of the polity appeared at the end of the Rigvedic period. The term Grama, appearing 13 times in the Rigveda, does not give the sense of a village but a tribal unit mobilized for fighting. The Rigvedic king, it's believed, was one of the equals whose hereditary position was not unquestioned. Several references suggest that the king owed his office to the choice of the people. Most references to the election of the king by the tribesmen which are found in the Atharva Veda, but the practice must have begun much earlier. Some stray references to it are found in the Rig Veda as well. This clearly shows that the tribe elected its chief. However, some references suggest that kinship or chiefship was confined to certain families, even though the actual examples do not confirm the practice of royal succession in one family for more than 3 generations. Thus, it's quite doubtful if the law of primogeniture was sharply defined. This lack of strong hereditary succession came in the way of chief to become the most powerful person. His authority was also curtailed by the tribal assemblies called Sabha, Samiti, Vidhata, Parishada, and Gana. Prohita was another powerful person who accompanied the king to battle and boosted his morale with prayers and spell. Because of the constant wars, the tribal chief or the king commanded the service of a large number of slaves. This, along with the acquisition of large number of cattle, made the chief a wealthy person. The Rigvedic king did not have elaborate administrative machinery because the nature of the Rigvedic economy could not support it. An economy in which the surplus was very small, the king and his officials received only bali, that is, offering to a prince or to a god. This tribute was received in kind from the clansmen of the chief and from the conquered people. However, these tributes were neither regular and nor stipulated and hence cannot be called a tax. Similarly, the term Sinani and Sina, used 20 times in Rig Veda, do not show the existence of a regular standing army. The military functions were invested in the Vedic assemblies. The Vrajapati, the Kulupa, head of the family, and the Gramini all appear to have functioned as military leaders. The only function who had some permanent responsibility for defense was Prohita, that's commander of mud forts or strongholds. Later Vedic period. While there was no element of territory in the Rigvedic polity, there was a definite transition to a territorial government in the later Vedic phase. It was possible because of certain changes in the material base of the people. An expansion and shift in the center of activity was made possible by the use of iron tools and weapons. In the later Vedic period, small communities merged to become large units. The Bhartas and Puras of the Rigvedic period came together to become the Kaurava tribe, who allied with the Panchalas, and the two together occupied the whole of the western UP. Now the ruler claimed a portion of agricultural produce as a regular tax. Society became differentiated on the basis of Varna hierarchy. Consequently, the nature of the kingship was transformed. Gradually, the territorial element asserted itself. The elaborate coronation ritual called Rajasuya, extended over 2 years, required a fixed place. The Kora Panchala region, the place of royal seat, came to be known as Asvidita. In the Ratna Vamsa ceremony, the king had to approach dignitaries who lived in permanent dwellings. The Atharva Brahmana enumerates 10 forms of government prevalent in different parts of the country, which shows that power was established at fixed geographical locations. Ek Raja may mean a ruler whose authority was undisputed in his domain. The Satapatha Brahmana called the king Rashtra Bharta or sustainer of the kingdom. Towards the end of the later Vedic period, the territorial idea generated a sense of possession over the land. Now the king claimed to grant a part of the land with the consent of the clan. The king now belonged to a Kshatriya class who tried to enlist the support of the priests for domination over the masses of the people. The king was now called the protector of the Brahmins and divorcer of the enemies. In the later Vedic age, the kingship became hereditary. A formula from the Satapatha Brahmana could be used to secure kingship for 10 generations. We also came across the term Rajaputra, which can be interpreted as the king's son in many cases. In later Vedic phase, the divine element came to be associated with the king. This period also marks the firm beginning of a proper taxation system and administrative machinery. The term Visamata, eater of the people, used for the king shows that he lived on tributes collected from his kinsmen and others. We hear of an official called Bagadoga who distributed shares on behalf of the chief. The 12 Ratnis seems to have been officials. Towards the end of the Vedic period, army emerged as an important element in the Vedic polity. In some sense, the later Vedic period marks also the beginning of royal bodyguards. It's also thought that the references to Sitapati and Satapati indicates the beginning of a regular system of provincial administration, and Adharyata is regarded as a village official appointed by the king. The rise of large territorial states made it difficult for the popular assemblies to function as they did earlier. Consequently, the Sabha and Samiti got an aristocratic flavor and came to be monopolized by the male gender, and some of their activities were taken over by the officials, the tribal assemblies. Vidhata. The term Vidhata is mentioned 122 times in the Rig Veda and seems to be the most important assembly in the Rig Vedic period. Vidhata was an assembly meant for secular, religious and military purposes. The Rig Veda only once indicate the connection of women with the Sabha, whereas Vidhata is frequently associated with women. Women actively participated in the deliberations with men. It seems that the Vidhata was the earliest folk assembly of the Indo-Aryans, performing all kinds of functions: economic, military, religious and social. Produces were distributed in the Vidhata. The members discussed the exploits of heroes and conducted wars against the hostile tribes. The Vidhata also provided common ground to clans and tribes for the worship of their gods. Sabha. The term Sabha, used 8 times in Rig Veda, denotes both the assembly and the assembly hall. The later sense comes from the later Vedic text. This assembly was also attended by women who was called Sabhavati. It was basically a kin-based assembly, and the practice of women attended it was stopped in later Vedic times. A passage in Rig Veda speaks of Sabha as a dicing and gambling assembly. It was also associated with dancing, music, witchcraft and magic. It discussed pastoral affairs and performed political and administrative functions and exercised judicial authority. Samiti. All the 6 references to Samiti comes from the latest books of the Rig Veda, showing that it assumed importance only towards the end of the Rigvedic period. It's generally agreed that the earlier Samiti was a folk assembly in which people of the tribe gathered for transating tribal business. According to Lording, it was a core comprehensive conference which included the common people, wish, the Brahmanas and the rich patrons. Probably it was a general tribal assembly. It discussed philosophical issues and was concerned with religious ceremonies and prayers. A reference in the Atharvaveda suggests that the Samiti was identical with the tribal military unit Grama, whose collection was called Samagrama. However, the political function of the Samiti were far more permanent. References suggest that the king was elected and re-elected by the Samiti. In the beginning, there was no difference between the Sabha and the Samiti. Both are said to be daughters of Prajapati. The Atharvaveda shows that both were mobile units led by chiefs who kept moving along with the forces. The only difference between Sabha and Samiti seems to be that Sabha performed judicial functions which the Samiti did not. Later, the Sabha became a small aristocratic body and Samiti ceased to exist. Ghana. Ghana, the technical word for the republic, has been interpreted in most of the Rigvedic references in the sense of assembly or troop. A careful study shows that it was a sort of gentle organization of the Indo-Aryans. The leader of the Gana is generally called Ganapati and at some places Ganasaya Raja. Parashad. The early Parashad seems to be a tribal military assembly, partly matriarchal and partly patriarchal. However, the variety of the reference to the Parashad in the Rig Veda may also have been due to the non-Vedic character of the Parashad. In later Vedic period, it tended to become partly an academy and partly a royal council dominated by the priests, who functioned as teachers and advisors. Thank you very much. With this, we conclude today's lecture.